caught, thrown in the middle of this crowd. Fear, guilt, and shame, just all inside. The story continues. Teacher, they said to Jesus, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. The law of Moses, again, we talked about this is the Torah, the first 5 books of the Old Testament. And Moses had gotten laws from God, and he put these laws out. The law of Moses says to stone her. That's the penalty for adultery. This is stoning. This is not maybe the kind of stone maybe you're more familiar with. This is, laugh at that, it's very telling. This is the kind of stoning where they would pile rocks on a person until they were dead. So this is the penalty for her sin. What do you say? They were trying to trap him into saying something they could use against him. These guys didn't really like Jesus. Again, he was turning everything they knew upside down, and crowds really liked him for doing that. And so they were trying to trap him. They wanted to use something against him so they could call him out because they were trying to get rid of this guy. What Jesus does is incredibly important for us in our discussion about tensions, and specifically the tension between grace and truth. It says, but Jesus stooped down, didn't answer their question, and he wrote in the dust with his finger. They kept demanding an answer, so he stood up again and said, all right, let's stone her, right? But let the one who has never sinned throw the first stone. Maybe you've heard this culturally, cast the first stone, someone in glass house should throw stones. Very similar mindset. He said, all right, let's stone her. Let's kill her right here in front of everybody. But the person without sin, you start throwing stones first. Then he stooped down again and wrote in the dust. Who knows what he was writing? I don't know. I have no idea what he was writing in the dust. That's one of the questions I would want to get answered. What were you writing? When the accusers heard this, they slipped away one by one, beginning with the oldest. Interesting point. Until only Jesus was left in the middle of the crowd with the woman. So they leave at this simple statement. They realize they've been had. And they left oldest to youngest. Maybe because the oldest realized their sin a little more than the younger generation did. We continue. Jesus does something very, very important. Then Jesus stood up again and said to the woman, where are your accusers? Didn't even one of them condemn you? No, Lord, she said. Jesus said, neither do I. Go and sin no more. So here's something important about what Jesus said. He said, did anyone condemn you? She said, no. And he said, okay, I'm not going to do it either then. Now, the reason why this is interesting is because Jesus said, let the person without sin throw the first stone. One of the things that we believe about Jesus, that is written about Jesus, is that he was sinless, that he lived a full human experience, but yet without sinning. So he was the only one left that was able to throw a stone according to the statement that he gave. He chose not to condemn her, not to pass judgment, not to stone her and kill her. But then he says something, he doesn't stop there. And I think this is where we need to understand the grace and truth tension the best. Is he says, neither do I, go and sin no more. So Jesus does something interesting. He doesn't choose to condemn her, but he does address her sin. This is so important to understand because a lot of times we want to focus on one or the other, grace or truth. Truth would have just said, you're a sinner, and he could have condemned her. Grace says, I'm not going to condemn you. The balance of both says, I'm not going to condemn you, but go and sin no more. Don't keep doing and living the life you're living. He acknowledged both grace and truth at the same time when addressing this situation. It's very, very important that we embrace the tension between grace and truth. And here's how we do that. We are at our best when we embrace God's grace and God's truth and refuse to let go of either. We become the tension. We embody the tension when we hold on to God's grace and God's truth according to what God has said grace and truth is. According to the example that we see in Jesus, we hold on to both and we refuse to let go of either. You see, the interesting thing about grace and truth is that grace without truth leads to this word called licentiousness. It's basically just a license to do whatever. And I think we understand that at some point that stops, right? Because we don't just give a free pass to everyone for everything all the time, right? It's not just licentiousness. At that point, I looked in the thesaurus, say that 5 times fast, at what are some words that are connected to licentiousness, and it was like anarchy, chaos. Right? So we understand that grace without truth leads to chaos and anarchy, licentiousness. But truth without grace leads to legalism, which is you have to measure up or you're doomed. And we know that Jesus came into the middle of that and says you don't measure up. Have an ideal. But I use broken people. I save broken people. I care about broken people. I extend grace to broken people. Jesus held on to God's grace and to God's truth, and he refused to let go of either, and we're at our best when we do the same. So I want to look at this story and go, just 2 quick things of how do we do that? How do we hold on to both and refuse to let go of either? Because that is very hard. It's very difficult for us to live out in society. So first, how do we hold on to grace and truth? Refuse condemnation and choose kindness. Jesus had every right according to the law. We can talk about whether the law was just or whether that was the best way or how we do it now versus an ancient civilization, all of that. But legally, Jesus had the right to condemn her. He chose kindness instead of condemnation. Now, I think that one of the things that we default on when we've been wronged is condemnation. We want that person to pay for what they did. But what if we chose kindness? What if we said, I'm not going to ignore the how you treated me, the wrong that was done. I'm not going to ignore that. But I'm also not going to condemn you. I'm going to choose kindness. I'm going to choose relationship. I'm going to embrace the tension. I'm going to take the hit. I'm going to take the hurt. I'm going to sacrifice my feelings, my wants, my desires to be in relationship with you. Holding on to God's grace and God's truth at the same time. But then secondly, we refuse comparison and choose consideration. If the Pharisees were to compare just a list of right and wrong to this woman, guess what? They win. They win. They were just better at keeping the law than she was. Jesus said, no, I want you to consider yourself in this. Let's not compare ourselves to her. Let's consider ourselves. Let's look inward and reflect on who we are and the sin that we have in our own life and the wrong we've done to other people who maybe they've shown us grace. See, that's one of the things about people who say they follow Jesus. One of the things they've done is they've accepted this enormous grace from God. But yet sometimes people who follow Jesus can be the least likely to give grace and forgiveness. Those who receive grace should be giving it freely. And so we choose to consider ourselves rather than compare ourselves to others. The comparison trap, right? If we compare ourselves to someone else, no one wins. None of us are good enough. There's a guy who wrote a book, his name's Caleb Kaltenbach. It's called Messy Grace. He's a pastor in California. He has an incredibly unique story I highly recommend. Anyone wants to explore the idea of grace and truth further. His book, Messy Grace, it goes right into the heart of his story that is incredibly relevant in our culture now when it comes to grace and truth. He says this. He says, another name for the tension between grace and truth is love. It's only when we accept the demands of living in this tension that we can show the fullness of love to people. What does love require of me? We talked about last week. We're going to begin practicing asking that question. What does love require of me? Especially when we're in a situation that is tense. In a situation that requires wisdom, we're going to ask, what does love require of me? Well, if we want to embody, as Jesus did, grace and truth, I would say together as a church, as Downtown Faith, and individually, we have to hold on to God's grace and God's truth and ask the question, what does love require of me? Because tension doesn't make truth less true, it makes it more real. We want to jump into the tension. We want to embrace the tension and ask the question, what does love require of me? I'm going to ask Josh to come up here. We're going to sing a song about grace, and here's what I want us to really know and embrace right now about grace. We all need it. We need it from others. We need it from ourselves. And we need it from God. We all get it wrong. We all miss the mark. The church will use a word like sin, and sometimes people push away from that, and they'll use other words that they're really saying the same exact thing, the ego self, the false self. We use those words, and they all represent us missing the mark. Us getting it wrong with others, with ourselves, with God. Not at peace with ourselves, with others, with God. Not existing in the tension with ourselves, with others, and with God. So the question is, what does love require of me? Maybe what love requires of you is to show yourself a little grace. To show someone in your family a little grace. A little more grace. Maybe what love requires of you, the most kind thing, is to share the truth with somebody. Because we can embody both of them. We can hold to both of them. God's standard for grace and God's standard for truth. And we can refuse to let go of either one and embrace the tension. Josh's going to sing about grace. I would love for us all to take this time to contemplate the grace that we need to show ourselves, others. Grace that we need from God. And that grace is available today.